After the death of Augustus, the succeeding Julio-Claudians kept the empire going, until Emperor Nero's mismanagement of the state came to an end in 68 CE. After a full year of chaos, a new dynasty came to rule Rome, the Flavians. Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian, would rule Rome until almost the end of the 1st century, and they introduced such remarkable buildings as the Great Flavian Amphitheater, the Colosseum. It was in the reign of Vespasian's son Titus that one of the greatest disasters befell the Roman Empire, but it didn't come from war.
Pompeii was a city of about 165 acres and a population of 10 to 20,000. That's small by modern standards, yet Pompeii had everything that an ancient city needed. It had a forum, which was the downtown major civic square, which was a monumentalized urban space with a grand colonnade around it, a major temple at the north end, civic buildings around the south side, a sanctuary nearby. It had everything that you would want in terms of the religious, commercial, and civic part of a Roman town. There were major streets coming into the forum. All the streets in the city were paved. There were 2 theaters, a large open one, a smaller covered theater. There was an amphitheater, and so Pompeii was an entertainment area, a place that attracted people from the areas around it. All the streets were paved, and there were infrastructure systems that we recognize even in modern cities. There were traffic control arrangements that don't survive in any visual way, but based on wear patterns that we see on the streets and the curbstones, we know that traffic moved in certain directions. There were infrastructural systems for water. Water was brought into the city by an aqueduct. It arrived at a certain point. It was distributed throughout the city. There were fountains. Water went into private houses. And so there was a high level of sophistication. There were bathing establishments that received the water, and there were hygienic areas with public latrines, and many houses had their own private toilets within them. So Pompeii was many things. It was a place where many wealthy people lived and had their political careers, but it was very much a commercial center. It was strategically located within the region of Campania so that it was at the intersection of trade routes, and from early on it exploited that position. So we should see Pompeii as a commercial center and an entertainment center or venue that attracted people from the areas around.
Already devastated by a series of earthquakes in 62 CE, Pompeii had not yet fully recovered when the main disaster struck. It fell victim to a volcanic eruption that covered the town with ash as thousands fled. The town, since its rediscovery in the 15th century, has inspired novelists, historians, and even makers of horror films.
Volcanic fury of Vesuvius. From the ravaged city of Pompeii, across 2,000 years, comes one of the strangest mysteries of all time. The curse of the Faceless Man.
Pompeii has been studied by scholars since the 18th century, and one focus of interest has been the Pompeian house, which forms itself into a number of related types, but which generally features certain noteworthy features. So let's take a moment and look at where these folks typically would have lived. Well, middle-class homes lined the streets of Pompeii and often had small shops, little mom-and-pop businesses in the front of the house. To reach the family quarters, one went through a little corridor called the Fauces, F-A-U-C-E-S, or the jaws of the house, and thus you entered into the main area known as the atrium, A-T-R-I-U-M. Now, the atrium was normally open to the sky to allow rainwater to come in and be stored within a cistern below a central sunken little pool, which caught and stored the water coming in the roof. The open part of the atrium was known as the compluvium, where the water would come in, and the little catch basin was the impluvium. The cisterna was below it. One then progressed back in the house to a tablinum, Tablinum, which might function as a reception area, and then you go beyond it. One would continue to a colonnaded backyard or a peristelium, a peristyle area, or an open-air garden, which was called a hortus, Hortus. Now, within the house would be at least one dining room or triclinium, 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 as well as sleeping quarters or a cubicula. A cubiculum would be Cubiculum. There could also be a kitchen, and chamber pots were also used in place of actual toilet facilities with plumbing. There would be a lararium, Lararium, or a place of worship for the divinities of the house, which would also be the site of appropriate veneration of ancestors of the family. And this was located often near to the atrium. Pompeian houses are currently being studied with the aid of computers. In fact, why don't we pause for a moment and take a look? In the mid-19th century, Giuseppe Fiorelli became director of excavations in Pompeii and fought to bring methodology and scientific technique there. Facing stiff opposition from king and clergy, he was considered too radical, too aggressive, and was even thrown into jail for a year and his work destroyed. But when Italy was liberated by Garibaldi in 1870, Fiorelli became director of excavations at Pompeii. And now today, modern scientists are following in his footsteps, learning all kinds of new things about Pompeii and what it was like to live in that doomed community before the end came.
One of the questions I asked myself when I started really focusing on research on ancient cities, Ostia and especially Pompeii, was how would I convey the experience of these environments to my students? And of course there's PowerPoint, which is still basically a 2D, more or less static experience of the space. You can do you can film the space and show that film, but that doesn't immerse the students. They don't have any choices to make about where they go, so it's not really immersive. So when I thought about that, I was really drawn to games because I knew, in a sense, that's become even more powerful for them. For most of these kids, it's more powerful than film. They invest more time and money in game-playing experiences than they do in going to movies, for instance. And so I thought that could provide a really useful avenue and for getting them interested in the environments. The part two of that was, what if I could get them to build those environments? That would be the most immersive way of getting them engaged with how Pompeian houses work, how their decorative codes make sense. And so it proved to be quite challenging in terms of their engagement with the technology, but it's extremely emotional to them. They get very attached to the houses that they work on. This is a long-range project, but one of the questions you face is, what is it telling us, and how fast can it deliver meaningful contributions to our understanding of Pompeian wall painting? And I think it delivers those results almost every time I teach this class. They will notice, because they're so deeply immersed in these paintings, they will see, oh, this painting is actually looking directly across the atrium to this other painting. And if you look at that painting, it's looking through this window at this other painting. So these three paintings, for instance, are having a dialogue with each other. And it's very common that that type of recognition has not happened in the literature. And you can spend a long time in these houses and not necessarily deduce those relationships. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the House of the Prince of Naples, a house in Pompeii, which we're looking at now obviously from the top down. And one of the things we wanted to do with this game engine technology was allow free movement and exploration of the model, not just from a first-person perspective, but from what we might call a godlike perspective from outside the house, where we can rotate it around and also drop the walls if we wish, and see the inside space. Turn the walls back on, drop the roof. Oop. Drop the roof, and then look at the space from that angle. In addition to this mode of exploring the model, we'll turn the roof back on. It can also be explored in first-person perspective in real time, just as if you were playing a game. And it's this possibility of exploring the model this way that I think makes it really powerful for teaching students about Roman domestic space. And so you have free movement around the model, and it's really especially powerful if you go to this spot in the house. You can see that you're now making a choice in terms of where you want to go in space, and the Romans seem to have marked that choice with a wall painting in this barrel vault of a hippocamp, a view through the window that you can see a domestic shrine. And then down this particular axis, you can see they've used the doorways to frame a painting of Dionysus.